Hey everybody, welcome to Dwell. If we can all find our seats, we're going to get started and get the people in from the heat. Come on in and cool off. Hey everybody, my name is Brian Woe and I'm part of the leadership team here, so I just want to say thanks for coming. We're really glad that you're here. We're doing these conversations. This is the third of 3 weeks that we're doing this, so it's a little bit non-traditional for our church gathering, but we really value the time that we can talk about the story of Dwell. And then as you talk around your tables and you're sharing with one another and listening to each other, we hope that your stories, we can see how you begin to intersect your story with the story of Dwell Church and how that even fits into the bigger picture of God's overarching story in our lives. So thanks to all the table leaders who have been helping out with things. And we heard so far reports, everybody's been pretty well behaved, so appreciate that. Although that's not to say that we hope there's room for disagreements. We know that everybody comes from different backgrounds and different viewpoints, so we just encourage each other to listen with respect and enter the conversations like that. So the goal after these 3 weeks, and this is the end of the 3 weeks, so the goal after today is that we hope that each of us will find a unique way that we can go deeper into the community of Dwell Church, and that may be by joining one of our short-term small groups that's going to start meeting shortly, or perhaps if you haven't already started serving at Dwell, we have all these roles for people to help be builders at Dwell and help build what God is doing as we move Dwell forward in this story. And so we'll have opportunities for you to sign up for one of those roles here at Dwell as well. But that's enough for the introduction. I'm going to invite Matt up to get us started with our conversations.
All right, everybody. Great to be here with you on what I believe to be the hottest day of the year. Is this true? Let's pretend it's true. My name is Matt Stefan. I'm part of the leadership team here at Dwell Church. We've been in a series called Welcome to Dwell. The goal is for you all to hear each other's stories, but also to hear the story of Dwell. I've been making the claim that across the last 4 weeks, you would know if this is a place where you could spiritually belong at the end of this. Some of you, maybe it's your first time here. That's amazing. I'm so glad you're paying us a visit. It's a really bold step to visit a church plant that's only 7 months old. I'm going to ask you to take another bold step. Click the QR code. Stay connected with us. Get on our email list. Figure out if this is a place that could be your spiritual home. I sure hope that it is. Part of what I've been looking forward to about this series for the last couple of months as we've been planning it is I have been saying, if you've been coming for a long time, you've heard me say, amazing people go to Dwell Church, and I have been waiting for you all to get to know each other. That's what this has been about. So I want to give you a little recap of where we have been, but the big picture of these 4 weeks has been to get to know what Dwell Church is about. I have hoped that you have been able to get to know anything you would ever want to know about Dwell. That's been our goal. But I also tried to think of what is like a single image to encapsulate what I believe we are building here, and here's what I think the best possible picture of the future of Dwell, or at least its current state. Here's the current state of Dwell. This guy right here. Does everybody know who this is? World famous pygmy hippo baby Moo Dang is the thing most trending on the internet. And that's what Dwell Church is. We're just a little baby. We're cute. We're cuddly. We don't know how big we're going to be. It's just the perfect image of what Dwell Church is like. Of course, the internet did this with the hippo. That's probably not at all what Jesus looked like, but one of the ways we like to think of Dwell Church is we are preaching this expansive, beautiful, powerful message that Jesus was sharing. God is with you. You could imagine yourself being held by Jesus, just like this pygmy hippo, for the rest of your life, if you wanted to. That's the opportunity of following Jesus. Here's my personal favorite picture of Moo Dang. Biting a leg. I don't know. I get a kick out of this one. This one makes me happy. Anyways, Dwell Church, 7 months old. There are some things about Dwell Church that we have no idea. We don't know how to solve that problem. We don't know what it's going to be like. Then there are other things that we have a crystal clear picture of what we're trying to build. That we're trying to build a new church for a new era. And that's what we have been talking about. And we think that maybe, quite possibly, the church of the future looks something like Dwell. So let's talk about this journey that we've been on. We started a few weeks ago. I said the story of church really can be described as 3 gifts. And my last church, which I loved, they gave me an amazing gift to go on sabbatical. And during that sabbatical, I thought about what is the church I want to work at for the rest of my life. And then I realized it looks like this, and it doesn't exist anywhere. So my wife said, you should maybe plant a church. And I was shocked. And yet, she's smarter than me, so here we are. The second gift that was given to Dwell Church is the gift of amazing people. I hope you really delight in getting to know one another. Truly amazing people come to church here. And the last gift that I think we're going to try to give to the world is this idea that there was once a gospel that went something like, Jesus died for your personal sins so you might one day escape to heaven. And some of that is true and important, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the most important thing in human history. But if we said that was the gospel, it would be too small. The gospel that Jesus was preaching was the arrival of God's presence into your and my life. God planned to come and dwell into creation. And that is the great message we're going to try to give to the world, that Jesus is with you. In every place that you go, you carry the promise. You bear the promise of Jesus' presence out into the world. And we're going to share that with the world as best we can, that Jesus longs deeply to be with you. That's what this gathering is about, his promise to be here with us, within the gathering of people here. That's where we started, and that's really the genesis of Dwell Church. How do we build a church based on the presence of God? Week 2 was about this phrase that we use sometimes, a new church for a new era. We talked about a world in which we could really honor. Each church is called by Jesus to very different things. Dwell Church is called to something that 10,000 other churches may not be called to, and they're called to different things than Dwell Church will ever be asked to do by God. What we're called to do is be a new church for a new era, and embracing that unique calling lets us do a few things. It lets us cheer on other churches. They have a unique thing that they're called to do. We hope that they go and do it. The world will be better if every church sat down and thought, what is God really calling us to do? Let's do that. We want to cheer them on as they do it, even though we will also honor really fundamental differences. Let's call those out too, but we'll cheer them on as they discern. It lets us partner with them or even learn from them. What if we imagined a future where different kinds of churches were learning from each other instead of having a more conflictual relationship? And lastly, it allows us to dream. Let's dream together about what a church is that we would show up for every single week. And here we started to get into the imaginative and I think really empowering message of what is Dwell Church. Let's start imagining a God worth truly giving our lives over to. And if we started to imagine that God who is worth handing our life to, we might even start to get to imagine the actual God a bit more accurately. We're starting to be on the way of imagining God rightly when we think, oh, he might be worth giving my full life to. And we can dream of what would a community look like that was doing that. That's what week 2 was about. Last week, we've been talking about our calling this way. I always forget this slide. Here's what we're trying to say. We're called by a God who delights in us to reflect his character to one another and to the world as we build Dwell Church. And there is no plan B. If we don't build a church like this, no one else is going to. But also, we have a specific way we want to go about it. God delights in us. He delights in you. And we're going to reflect that delight back to one another as we build this thing. Last week was about this. We want to be a church the Bay Area wants to go to. And we were looking at some research and some thinking around the deep spiritual need that all humans feel. And that the thing that you could most do to bless your friends and family and neighborhood and coworkers is to find true satisfaction in your life with Jesus. If we went around out into the world as people full of love, offering love to everyone that we meet, gosh, the world would be transformed. And people want to go belong to a community like that, who's finding deep satisfaction within themselves and within their life with Jesus. This week we're talking about values that organically resonate. We specifically chose 5 values that when people read them, they say, I think I know what that means and I like it. That's what we were going for when we drew these up. We want the world to be able to look at this and say, that is a place that I would at least like to learn about, or at least I'm glad it exists. So our 5 values are this: Jesus-centered, trauma-informed, research-based, diverse, affirming, and inclusive. And part of what I want to do this afternoon, in amidst our conversations, is to walk through 3 or 4 things that each of these words might mean. So we have an emerging and clearer picture of what these mean for us to build a church on. We don't know what a church looks like that is based on those things, but we're trying to build one to find out. That's what we're doing. But first I want to start with this. Jesus-centered is the preeminent of all of them. Once we were in a vision and fundraising kind of evening, wine and cheese. We had a lot of those over the last year. And part of that is some Q&A, and someone asked, how do these relate to one another? And we kind of kicked that around and we were like, wow, the first one is so big and all-consuming. Everything else nests underneath it. In fact, you might say that the other four stem from our following of Jesus, that Jesus is actually the bedrock foundation of these other things. That's what we're going to go through this evening. And here I want to suggest this. Mark Sayers is an Australian pastor, thinker, cultural critic. He's really insightful. And he noticed this about the progressives like us in the world. He said, modern progressives want the kingdom without the king that a lot of our world is trying to build. A secular world, non-spiritual world, material world, based on what turn out to be quite Christian values. And so he's acknowledging progressives tend to hold actual kingdom values, but they have tried to build it without the king. Put a different way, in a different book, Glenn Scrivener argued this, The Air We Breathe. I love this book. It comes from a slightly different place on the political spectrum, but he argued this. In our world, values like equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, that we believe education is empowering and for everyone, science, freedom, and progress. These are 7 chapters in his book where he examines the intellectual history of these ideas and notices that each of them stem from the work of the church in a certain era. That what we are arguing are things like research-based, trauma-informed, diverse, affirming, inclusive, equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, progress. These are Christ values that he gave to the world as a gift. And if you double-click on those, you see God's humility to not even ask credit for it. God just blessed the world by making freedom a possibility. So what we're going to talk about today is our values and how they are when you drill down on them. Gifts that Jesus is giving to the world through places like Dwell Church and through people like you. Where this is going to land is I'm going to ask each of you to take another step tonight. Either join one of those Dwell short-term groups that Brian was talking about. We've put that out on our email a few times. We'll go through what those options are. Maybe your table says, let's do one of those together. That would be a really fun way to continue getting to know one another. Or there is a way to build Dwell Church that is more like what is sometimes called in churches a volunteer role. My dream is that every one of you says, I would be willing to have a discussion about maybe doing one of those roles. Now, we've jettisoned the word volunteer. Instead, we talk about the word build. I'm going to ask you to build Dwell Church. And what really are we building? We're building into environments. We're creating environments. We're building programs. But more than anything else, we're building into people. Because people are where God dwells. So later, in 40 minutes, exactly, I'm going to ask you to think about how will you build a place that God dwells. But let's get to know one another. We've been doing this for a few weeks. We started with share a little bit about yourself. And now we're at some of the deeper questions. So if it's some of your first times, you'll just have to kind of buckle up, share appropriately. I promise everyone at every table, knowing them personally, safe enough to share with. That's our goal. All right. Conversation 1. What's a significant faith challenge that you've experienced? If you don't feel comfortable answering that question, that's okay. Make up something. All right. Have fun. Good luck. Nobody's been injured so far. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Okay, bye. All right, everyone. It is with the deepest of regrets that I interrupt these sacred conversations. If anybody didn't get to go, kick that to the next conversation time. Pay it forward. Okay. Hope you had a great time sharing some of these painful sometimes, transformative moments of our lives. That's really deep stuff. Thank you for being willing to share something of that nature. Let's keep going. We're talking about what does it mean to have values that organically resonate. We're making the claim that a lot of these values that organically resonate with our world are gifts that Jesus himself was giving into the world, that those are in some ways the foundations and core values of the world that we live in, that we're trying to honor. So let's keep going. A bit deeper about Dwell Church core values. The first of these is Jesus-centered. A few things that we mean about these. First, a high view of Scripture. We do a lot of Bible here, which I just love, and I think rightly framed, rightly understood, it is so life-giving. I hope you experience it that way too. Personal friendship with Jesus as the center of the target for human life. That's going to be essential to the way we think, the way we treat each other. A desire that others might meet this Jesus. That's going to be essential to Dwell Church. let's keep going. We were making the argument that these other ones stem from the message and person of Jesus. So, research-based, what do we mean by that? Partly we mean the life of the mind. Jesus said to love God with your mind. And so we want to think in some ways about that maybe science is even something that Jesus was giving into the world, a pursuit of truth. And here we think about Jesus as the crafter, the craftsman, the artist who made the material world. That, of course, science is Jesus-centered, or should be. So we want to be pro-science, especially the emerging neuroscience, is just so strongly in favor of spirituality that as you look at the brain scan level studies of like people who pray, it really does do amazingly good things for your brain. There's actually some resources about this on our website under the research-based section of our values. Lastly, we want to say, especially Christian spirituality, that there's really great studies that people who, generation after generation, like really longitudinal studies of people following Jesus quite earnestly, it is a powerful blessing on your family, your mental health, your relationship. There's a lot of really good science around these things, so we want to be research-based. Generally pro-science, but also the neuroscience. We want to be trauma-informed. This means a couple different things. One, we want to be, in general, students of psychology. Now, my wife is a psychologist, and so she just tells me what to think. It's a really great system. Partly what we intend here is that it was always part of the Jesus way of doing things to have an internal journey, to get to know yourself, and even to have the problem of being unfamiliar to yourself. So in Psalm 139, the psalmist prays, God, would you search me? And the fundamental problem of human psychology is that we remain mysterious to ourselves. And that was a Christian idea first, that you have a problem of not knowing actually what is in your heart and needing help and maybe a community to find out what is in there. But we want to be psychologically informed. Partly what that means is we're all walking this internal journey of getting to know who we are, getting to know each other. We want to be emotionally intelligent. That is just essential for what Dwell is. We want to be aware that most people experience trauma, at least in the lowercase t form. We have to be highly aware, highly sensitive. Our radar has to be very sharp for what is going on in one another's lives. And we want to move from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. I want that to be a very gracious statement, packed with compassion for you, for myself, for one another. That we want this to be, above all else, a compassionate community. That's what we mean by trauma-informed. Diverse. Gosh, this one's easy. In the Bible, the kingdom is so diverse. This is a joyful thing that Jesus is doing. He's gathering quite a diverse crowd. In fact, oftentimes they hate each other. We're leaning into the idea that diverse teams and churches are smarter. This is what God called us to do. And lastly, if you go back and look at our series on diversity just from a month or two ago, we're casting a vision for a spirit-filled intersectional identity. That part of every identity and culture, there are some things that point us towards Jesus and the gospel because Jesus created all things. Some things in every culture are good and life-giving and point us towards God. And some things are misery-inducing, and we need the power of the Spirit to discern which is which. And so when we say that Jesus resides within us, I get to take all the layers of my personal identity and filter them through the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. It is a spirit-filled intersectional identity, and God is calling us to participate in this process, to think about the ways that we understand ourselves and make sure that they are pointing us towards the fruits of the Spirit and not away from them. So we're casting a vision for a spirit-filled intersectional identity. Lastly, affirming and inclusive. And I like to think that if you just follow sort of the linear, cumulative effect of our values, it naturally leads right here. First, we want to have a deeply biblical approach. I think that full inclusion is fundamentally a biblical argument. And the way the preaching works here is that once or twice a year, we sit down in tables like this, and we workshop some ideas, and we say, if your table was going to be in control of 4 weeks of Dwell Church, what would you do? Would it be no sermons and just discussion? Would it be just singing? You could do anything. So actually this series came out of our first community discernment where people said, we want to know what the heck you mean by those values. Here we are doing it. In fact, that's really all we do with our preaching. We want to discern together what God is saying to us. So one day we will dive all the way into a deeply biblical approach to being affirming and inclusive. Should you someday be part of a community discernment and say, it's time. That's what we want to hear about. That's what we'll do. But what we mean is full inclusion for our LGBTQ plus siblings. That means leadership. That means marriage, everything else. Yeah. And ultimately, this is a subset. This is just a small category of our broader mission to be a church where everyone can be seen. We want you to show up here and feel like, oh, gosh, people listened to me. They understood me in this compassionate way. I was seen there. I was known in this deep and maybe healing, restorative way. That's the goal. So those are the things that we think about when we say those are the 5 core values of Dwell Church. As I've said, not only is there no church built on those things, we also have no idea what one would look like, but we are trying our darndest to find out by building one right here. And a couple of things that I want us to think about together. I want you to think about going deeper into building a church based on those things. See, if we don't build it, no one else may ever do so. We're the ones who get to find out what a church like that could be and the gifts that church could give to the world. So a couple ways that I want to invite you to think about joining up here. One is we were launching 3 short-term dwell groups, one for emotionally healthy spirituality, one for how to read the Bible in 2024, and one for a dwell women's group. Now, those links will be available on our email list. You can get on that email list through the QR code right here. We'll send those out tomorrow. Today, I'm going to ask you to dream about maybe even having a small, non-committal conversation about doing some roles in Dwell Kids, Dwell Connections, Setup and Teardown, Worship and Tech. We got some specifics through the QR code that we're about to put up here in a minute, but I'm just going to ask you to have a conversation about those things. All right. And we'll come back to this one in a second. Let's see. Okay, I want you to share, what are you thinking about as your next step? If you didn't have time to finish the last conversation, great chance to do so. If you don't know what your next step is, maybe it's just come back next week. That'd be good too. But I'd love for you to share, what are you feeling your heart tugged on to do in order to build Dwell Church? You got 10 minutes for this one. Have fun. All right, everyone. Again, apologies for interrupting these sacred conversations. Important stuff. I want to leave you with a couple images of Dwell Church that are not a pygmy hippo. The first image of Dwell Church has to do with someone who called me right when we first launched our website. I had a friend, part of the story of Dwell Church is that we received a large grant to get started. So we put together a leadership team. We'd been kind of meeting as a Bible study, and we put up a website. And that was last November, coming up on a year. We put up our website, and then in February, we'll celebrate Dwell's 1-year anniversary. That's pretty fun, 1-year little birthday. We'll eat some cake and smear it all over our face like 1-year-old. I don't know. On my face. Oh, no. That's great. That's great. That's great. Wheels are really coming off of this thing. So we put up our website. I had a friend that called me, and this was a really close kind of old friend, and he said, Matt, I have a problem. He had gotten into a conflict in his marriage, and it wasn't anything serious, but it was really like their first. They've been married for 10 years. This was a big one. And if you've been married, you know some of those where you're like, I don't even really know what is happening between us. And that's what he was going through. And he called me and he said, Matt, I realize in this marital crisis that my life has been really easy. That I have a great family that I grew up in, that I have this great job that really pays the bills. And so I've never really needed my faith. It was just something that I did. It was a part of my life. And here on the eve of this, or in the middle of this marital crisis, he said, Pastor Matt, I don't know if my faith can handle this. I don't know if I actually am capable of trusting Jesus in this big singular crisis in my life, because I've never had to do it before. And I didn't think that I could. But he said, the day you put up your website, I was wrestling with this all night. I couldn't sleep. The next day you put up your website, so I looked at it, and the first thing that it says, you're Jesus-centered. And so I read it. Here's what it says on their website. When we're at our worst and at our lowest, Jesus says, I'll take that one. That's the one that I want. When we're at our best, Jesus says, let me teach you a more excellent way to be motivated by love. Jesus knows us to the bottom and loves us to the sky. He goes by many names, Savior, Lord, friend, teacher, and he calls us his own. We found centering our lives upon him to be a great life strategy. In his death, we're transformed, and in his resurrection, we're made new. We center our lives upon him the way a song is centered on a melody. Jesus is the song that we want our lives to sing. He dwells in us, and we dwell in him. In him, we're never without hope and never alone. And so my buddy called me, and he said, I was worried all night, do I really believe in Jesus? Would Jesus really help me? And then I woke up at 5:30 in the morning in this personal crisis, and I read, when we're at our worst and our lowest, Jesus says, I'll take that one. And this was the first thing that happened to Dwell Church, is that someone said, gosh, Jesus who loves me in my worst moment, knows me to the bottom, loves me to the sky. That is what I need. That is the image of what we were trying to build. Here's one more image of what we're trying to build. The last couple of weeks, been asking you to write some prayers for Dwell Church. Here is the word cloud no. Yes, this is the aggregate picture of everything we're trying to build. Community was the main thing. We're trying to build a community where we are accepted and loved, where God dwells within us, where we're growing. A community that is welcoming and inclusive. This is awesome. And there's me, little right there under welcoming, Matt. I love this image because the single biggest word is community. Dwell Church doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to our amazing staff, our amazing leadership team. You all are Dwell Church. We are building it together. We are building a community where people are seen and known and loved, where Jesus looks forward to dwelling among us. One of the most amazing things about the story of Jesus is that he likes being with you. He looks forward to it, and he dwells in communities where people are loved and known and seen and accepted. So that's what we're trying to build together. I want to ask you to spend 2 extra minutes here. Everyone here is probably capable of at least having a conversation about doing one of these roles. So I would love for everybody to pull out their phone and take a look at the sometimes big kind of leading a team role, and sometimes just really specifically, we just need a single task done each week. If you could think about doing those, that'd be amazing. Do that for 2 minutes. I'll be right back.